Personnel Committee meeting and a special joint meeting with the Energy and Environment Committee
On item 1 only.
on item 1 only. And on personnel, we have 3 additional items. I'm joined by the Chair of the Energy and Environment Committee, Councilmember Jan Perry. I'm Councilmember Dennis Zine, Chair of the Personnel Committee. We have other colleagues assigned to the committees, both Personnel, Energy, and Environment Committee. Have we heard from the other colleagues?
No, we haven't.
Okay. The other colleagues on Personnel are Paul Koretz, Bernard Parks. On the Energy and Environment Committee, Tony Cardenas, Richard Alarcon, Paul Koretz, and Paul Kokorian. So it is now 2:05. We will begin with item number 1, please.
On item 1, the City Council asserted jurisdiction over this matter, and the Board of Water and Power Commissioners has submitted a report and a resolution in response to the motion. This is relative to the suspension of the reciprocal arrangement between the Water and Power Employees Retirement Plan and the Los Angeles City Employees Retirement System. The deadline for council action on this matter is October the 13th.
Okay. We can have the representatives come forward, please.
CMA and CAO.
Anyone here on these items? This item? There's a room full of people and no one's coming forward.
Okay, who's coming first?
Mr. Miller,
Yeah, one-
you're always here to say something.
Wait, we have to do
DWP? Yeah, we should have the water and power folks. Plenty of chairs, plenty of table space. So, Councilmember Perry and I have questions on this, and if we can get, actually, I only have 18 questions, so
Let Mr. Miller start first.
I will share those with you. Mr. Miller, can you open up the discussion, please?
Certainly. This, the item before you, as was mentioned, was an action by the DWP board to suspend the reciprocity agreement between the city and Lacers. The way the agreement has worked for many years is that employees transferring between the two bring their seniority with them. What gets transferred in the case of, well, we're talking Lacers and DWP here, is the employee contribution and interest, but the employer contribution is not moved over.
If not, what?
Is not moved over, the employer contribution, the employee contribution and interest. Now, the Department...
Seniority is...
well, their retirement credits are moved. Now, the water and power pension formula, again, is 2.3% times years of service, and Lacers is 2.16. So the bottom line, and
really difficult to hear. Is there another microphone?
I'll try to talk a little bit louder.
Yeah.
Is that better? Okay. I think the department needs to address this and the rationale behind it, but in essence, what is created is an increase in their unfunded actuarial liability, because city employees are bringing retirement credits with them, but the employer contribution is not coming as well. So I think the issues before you, and I know you have a number of questions, is to explore the rationale behind it and really sort of assess the policy implications on the city, on DWP, on Lacers, on personnel, et cetera.
Water and power?
Good afternoon. My name is Javier Romero. I'm president of the LA Water and Power Pension Plan. And the reason why we're here before you today is that the program of the reciprocity was intended to be cost neutral. That was the intent. Over time, the liabilities have increased. So many more employees from the city coming over to water and power. The board recognized that after seeing an actuarial report and we just wanted to kind of stop the program to discuss with Lacers, see if we can have a more equitable program that's fair for both parties. This was not an attempt not to have city employees come over to water and power, and I believe our resolution reflected that. As a matter of fact, we're recipients of some very good city employees in the retirement plan. We have engaged Lacers. Lacers has participated at our board meetings to hear these discussions. Our plan manager has engaged the Lacers plan manager and trying to come up to a resolution that is equitable for both sides, that is fair, and at the same time meets our fiduciary responsibilities. And this is basically the first step to minimize the liabilities of the plan so that we can engage and come up with some new plan that makes sense and that is fair for both parties.
On DWP, the percent they get is what percent? For each year of service?
I have a severe hearing disability, and the echo in this room is...
The echo is terrible. On water and power employees, what percent do they get each year of service? What's the percentage they get on pension?
The formula is 2.1.
2 point what?
2.1, and if someone is 55 years of age, if a member is 55 years of age and has 30 years of service, in that instance, it's 2.3. There are not too many employees.
Identify yourself, please.
Sangeeta Bhatia, I'm the retirement plan manager for the Water and Power Employees Retirement Plan.
So they get 2.1.
Correct. And that compares to the Lacers plan of 2.16. There's really no difference in the two. The only difference is the manner in which the cost of living adjustments are proportioned by Water and Power. The treatment of the cost of living adjustment is the main issue with respect to that difference. So that's the same for Lacer.
Well, they're getting 2.16 for Lacer
Yes.
per year service and 2.1 for water and power.
Yes.
So they're getting a higher percentage with Lacer. Now you say the cost of living.
It's actually the same. It works out to the same. We actually proportion the cost of living adjustment based on the month in which a member retires. In the case of Lacers, it's taken up front, and so the 2.16 really equates to the 2.1.
Excuse
But
me,
it's also
no, we
2.3.
need to talk about apples to apples here.
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Lacers only gets 2.16
Right.
at 55 and 30 years of service.
Right.
Okay.
If you have less than 30 years of service at 55, you do not get the 2.16, there is a discount. So the 2.16 is comparable to the 2.3.
All right. Mr. Parks is joining us. Mr. Parks, we're on item number 1 on the joint committee. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that it's 2.3% if you're age 55 with 30 years of service.
And 30.
I'm sorry, at
Both. It has to be 55 and 30.
55 and 30 years of service.
Correct.
Okay. Now, if you are with the Department of Transportation under Lacers for 25 years, you then transfer over to Water and Power with 25 years of service credits, and then you retire 5 years later, and you're 55 years of age. Who's going to pay that pension for the first 25 years? You had 5 years with Water and Power, and you got 25 with Lacers.
At present, it would be Water and Power.
They'd pay the whole tab.
That's right.
So they'd pay the full tab for 30 years of service when Lacers, so the individual contributed to Lacers for 25 years.
Right.
So Lacers then keeps that money?
Yes.
Or how does that balance out between Lacers and,
It may
Water
be
and Power?
helpful if I give a little bit of background. Basically, the way
we're joined by Mr. Alarcon. Go ahead.
the reciprocity arrangement as it is right now basically just requires employee contributions to come over, not the employer contributions. So in effect, someone who has worked 25 years with any city department other than Water and Power, and they transfer into Water and Power, bring their employee contributions and get entitled to the entire benefit as it exists at Water and Power. The funding by the city into this individual's account remains with Lacers. That's the way the program is structured. And at the time that it was structured, the intent was that it would be, this has been mentioned, that it would be cost neutral between the two pension plans. In other words, the transfers into DWP would more or less equal transfers from DWP into the city. over the last few years, the program has not been working as it was visualized and intended. And as a result, the pension plan at Water and Power has taken on quite a bit of liability, which they need to fund for. And we had the Siegel Company, our actuary, do a complete study. They looked at the last 6 years and ending July 1, 2010. And the report that they came out with is actually in your, we did provide the report in your package. It stated there that the impact on the unfunded actuarial liability up to July 1, 2010, including interest, was $183 million. So this is going to be paid by the Department of Water and Power over a period of 15 years, amortized over 15 years, at the rate of 1.4% of payroll approximately, and that's current payroll, that is.
How long has this arrangement been in place?
The program was
reciprocity.
established in 1980.
So since 1980, this has been the case. I have a number of other questions. I'm going to have my colleague, Councilman Perry, but we have a number of questions, so Councilman Perry.
Okay, great, and I'm asking you as Chair of the Energy and Environment Committee. You are, I think everybody's painfully aware that we've been reducing staff over the past couple of years, and if things continue in the same direction, we may continue that trend too. So there have been vigorous efforts to take city employees who've been laid off or terminated in Department of Water positions, Department of Water and Power positions, to avoid, having them just out of a job, rather than having the Department of Water and Power fill the positions from the outside. So my question to, I guess, Department of Water and Power reps are, did you put this issue, did you include the Chief Administrative Officer and the Chief Legislative Analyst on this issue of reciprocity so that you could have input from the city side before putting this before your own board of Department of Water and Power Commissioners?
We did make every effort to keep them informed. We provided them with copies of reports. However, at the end of the day, it is the retirement board that does have the fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the plan is funded such that it is sustainable. And so we kept them informed over time.
But you did not invite their input on this?
Not at that time, because as I should mention that the step that's taken so far has been taken so far is just a preliminary step. At this point, it was basically, let's stop the program, let's try to prevent any additional liability from being incurred while we study what the costs are, and also look at potential possible changes to the design.
Okay, let's hold on that issue. Now, your total unfunded actuarial accrued liability is $183 million?
No, that
What
is
is
the
it?
impact of the
What's
transfers.
the impact of it?
Yes, impact of the transfers only for the last 6 years, for about 1,600 transfers in the last 6 years.
The DWP's pension system has similar issues to LACER's, and just like any public pension system right now. And obviously, we're all working for the same goal of strength of the pension system and long-term sustainability. Now, at the risk of sounding gratuitous, I know DWP pensions tend to be more generous than LACER's, and in many cases, Department of Water and Power employees, for various reasons, do make more than city employees. So what was the logic behind eliminating the reciprocity with city employees just to address a small portion of this problem, other than complete and more comprehensive pension reform to bring your system more in line with LACER's, like what pension systems are doing all over California?
Don't all jump at once.
Okay,
Well,
you had your moment.
I see.
This morning.
10 eyes, deer eyes.
Okay, you want me to go back and start over?
it's a long question.
Do you want me to start over?
Long question.
All right. All right. Why don't I just make it easy? DWP employees sometimes make more money. In many cases, the pensions are more generous. Okay, that's out there. Your first action was to eliminate reciprocity with the city employees who are coming from here to DWP. That is probably an insignificant amount in terms of fiscal impact compared with the greater possibility that you could achieve with absolute pension reform of the system. So what was your thinking behind that? Basically, city employees are coming over there, then you eliminated reciprocity, and they get the door shut on them. So what'd you do that for? Is that easy enough?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just want to make the record clear that the board did not take an action to eliminate the reciprocity. The board took an action to suspend the reciprocity,
Okay, so what was your thinking in suspending the reciprocity?
to minimize the liabilities of the plan.
And
As
then how-
as fiduciaries of the pension plan, the board has fiduciary issues with the plan itself. It's not what the city's hiring or too many employees. That's not the concern of the pension board. The pension board is to make sure that the plan is safe and sound. And if there's some unsound liabilities, our obligation as board members is to bring that to the table for discussion. The intent of the reciprocity program was so it could be cost neutral on both sides. And that over the years, we failed to do that. And we're just bringing this up before, to engage layers to say, let's make a design to the reciprocity that doesn't make sense anymore, so that it's fair to both pension plans. That's all. It has nothing to do with not wanting lasers. Our resolution clearly states that we would continue taking city employees with the understanding that they would be subject to a new agreement.
May I also add one point? Mary Higgins from the DWP Retirement Office. Pension plans, pension offices are given programs to administer. Generally, plan design, what the pension program is going to look like, the benefits are going to look like, tend to be an issue for the plan sponsor to determine. As the council determines for LACERS, the pensions board and the DWP board determine for the retirement office at DWP. So they're given plans to administer.
So tell me, and I'm not sure between the three of you who's the best person to answer this, what has been undertaken on behalf of the pension plan to begin the process of pension reform on a long-term basis? I understand your need to protect your fiduciary responsibility. I understand that. But there's a much larger problem at hand here. So what initiatives have been instituted to deal with the larger picture?
Again, we consider that out of the realm of the scope of responsibility for the pension board itself, that tends to be a plan sponsor responsibility. However, our board has acted very proactively and cooperatively with the department to reduce costs in the retirement office so that the plan remains financially viable, including identifying programs that may be incurring costs that could be mitigated.
Okay, I got a question for the city attorney. The LACERS reciprocity provisions are codified by ordinance in the admin code, and this has been in place for many years. As required by ordinance, now the DWP board has taken appropriate actions, and I use that as a term of art, in the past. And the reciprocity has been fully implemented. Now, can the DWP board suspend the reciprocity provisions, or must that be done by ordinance too, and then approved by council and then signed by mayor?
We have our attorneys here who specialize in that area. Marie McTeague is coming forward.
Good afternoon.
Okay, and I'm asking a process question.
Yes,
for consistency's sake.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that all three of these plans have very unique governance structures within the charter. So to answer your question as to whether reciprocity could be suspended under water and power and not LACERS, yes. The answer to that is yes. The two provisions, although they may have been intended to act together, are in fact separate provisions. Water and power has plan provisions which are would be approved by the Board of Commissioners and then adopted by the Retirement Board, the Board of Administration, whereas Lacers has their plan benefits codified within the admin code, and ultimately would be approved by your body.
So in the case of Lacers, Lacers would have to be consistent from beginning to end in terms of enacting and implementing the reciprocity and/or suspending the reciprocity. No matter what, it still would have to go through the process of board, concurrence with council, and then affirmation by mayor.
Yes, as to Lacers, correct.
As to Lacers. Now, as to...
I might be wrong on that.
Go ahead. Here, conclude.
Yeah. Right, that's what she said, I think. I'm sorry if I misunderstood you. No.
Any plan provisions for Lacers is done by ordinance by council and mayor, so the Lacers board would have no authority or input in that design.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Could you state your name?
Sally Choi, Lacers, which is completely different than the DWP board governance structure.
Okay, and then explain the difference again.
The water and power provisions are within the charter, under 1186 of the charter. The Board of Commissioners would approve any plan design changes, and then any resolution reflecting that would then be adopted by the Board of Administration. So it does not involve council at all, unlike Lacers.
Okay, and then, Madam City Attorney, I guess my concern is, it sounds like they have two different governance structures, two different processes, but in terms of a suspension of reciprocity, it doesn't sound to me like we have recourse on anything other than, or any way to pursue another approach unless it's with Lacers. Am I correct? I mean, the suspension is basically a way to put it on pause, so it's not a denial, it's not a termination. I don't know how long a suspension can go on, but in effect, the suspension is very similar to anybody who gets caught in that window is stuck, basically. Am I wrong?
I think that's perhaps the practical consequence of the suspension. I don't know if legally that is the end result. Are you able to address that, Marie?
Is that a 245 question?
Well, in terms of 245, if that's where you're directing your analysis, the action that you would be taking here today is basically voting up or down. That's the only action you can take. You can't amend what the board's action was originally.
Yeah, I know we can just vote it up or down and either send it back or affirm it. But, it's funny, I wasn't actually thinking about it within the 245 context, but thank you. I hadn't even thought about that. I wasn't even there yet. But I guess we're going to go there sooner. Those are my questions for now.
I will share this with my colleagues, and I'll come back to the questions. Mr. Parks?
Let me just express some of my concerns, is that, and the reason that the 245 was initiated is I understand, and I commend you for being concerned about the issue of your pension and how solvent it is. But my concern is I think you went about it backwards. It would appear that you would have come together and studied it and come to a conclusion, because I don't believe that it is a minor or temporary issue if you just say suspend because now someone can't promote. You've actually frozen the personnel system of the city of LA and put yourself on an island that says we're not going to take anyone, but we're just going to look at this pension. There's no timeline on how long it's going to be. You're basically telling the personnel director that people in the rest of the city cannot find their way into DWP. And it would appear if we were trying to, and I know this may be difficult, but if we were working as a city, we would have said, let's sit down and figure out if because this $400 million that's projected of loss didn't happen overnight. it has gradually moved up. So it wasn't like the world was going to come to an end if it became 451. So it appeared there's time to say, get Sally Choi in the room, get Jerry Miller in the room, get Mr. Santana in the room, get our people in the room and figure out with this imbalance that's going forward, is it an imbalance forever? Or does it slow down because the financial situation of the city changes to where we're not directing so many people to your department? And so that's what my concern is. It just seems that it went backwards. The other thing is, it seems a tad inconsistent to me that we have this immediate concern about the pension, but no more than a month ago, it was almost cavalier that your department came before this committee and had a 157% increase in medical that you didn't even view as being significant. And so here we are asking questions, and it was cavalier. Yeah, it was. Yeah. In fact, you didn't even know what the percentage increase was for the year. You didn't know it until you got to council. So how could you have a concern on the pension that is so great that it requires immediate action, but yet you're spending several $100 million a year on medical that's going up by leaps and bounds, and no one even viewed it as being significant? Those are the kind of things that cause at least me some concern as to how the department operates in isolation, as though they're the only ones in the ballgame. And so, again, commend you on one part. I just think you went about it the wrong way. And, Jerry, let me ask you one thing. Where are we on the whole package of reform issues about DWP for charter? Is that going to get to the council before November 3rd, or?
Well, it will. There are a variety of pension issues, primarily Lacers and Sworn. But there has been some discussion about potential charter amendments and DWP as well. Those are working their way through Rules Committee. But, yeah, they will be before the council. The intent, I believe, is to have sort of a comprehensive discussion of pension reform. And again, Lacers would not have to go on the ballot. Any changes to the charter and DWP or the Sworn would have to.
But part of that, I think Mr. Smith did about 5 or 6 motions.
Yes.
Part of that was talking about the restructure of the pension system or the board or how it currently operates. Was that one of them?
One of those, I'll have to check. I don't recall a motion relative to the DWP pension board. There were motions relative to the DWP board itself, the commission.
Yeah. Could you check on that? Because I thought that was one of his 5 or 6.
Sure.
Because it's kind of, and this prompts the larger question, is that, we have all of these pension issues that are forthcoming, and yet we have a pension system that's somewhat isolated, does their own thing. It's an all in-house deal. It is far more generous than any other pension fund, and yet it's built so that there's little or no review outside. And I think what we're missing is that the fact that we get sensitive about general fund because it's tax dollars and comes from different ways. It seems like that people are somewhat oblivious to the fact that the ratepayers are the same people that are paying taxes. And so if you give those generous pensions, it's the ratepayers paying it. They just happen to be the same people that are paying parking taxes, parking fines, property taxes. So we often deal with them as they're separate, but in fact they're the same people. So it shouldn't be viewed as this is just a kind of a lockbox fund that they get to play with. It's really general fund. They just happen to run it in behalf of the ratepayers. But again, I think we have to be far more sensitive as to how that money is being spent and whether there is appropriate oversight by the council. And there's no doubt in my mind, when the pension system in DWP was built, it was built to where it was kept in-house for the very reasons that things could happen without the oversight. And so I think we need, if it's not, you need to have something in that package that deals with pension reform like we're talking about for other pension systems. And I think it's kind of interesting from Mrs. Perry's question that we would find where the pension systems are going up geometrically in cost. But we find that one sliver of reform, such as stopping or suspending the movement of personnel as our reform package, as opposed to looking at the larger issue and looking at the generosity of it and looking at how you can fix it for the long term. And those are the kinds of things I think we have to do and ensure that the council has the input and the ability to address it. I had a bunch of questions, but I just felt better saying what I just said.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Mr. Alarcon.
Yeah, what happens if an employee moves now? What happens to, what do they get the city's pension, or they stop getting they start a new pension system at DWP? What happens?
The reciprocity suspension is not in place yet.
Okay. Well, let's assume it goes, that we don't do the reciprocity. What happens to an employee that moves from the city to DWP?
Right now, the way the reciprocity...
Not right now. If we eliminate reciprocity, what happens to an employee that moves to DWP?
If you eliminate reciprocity, a person moving or starting at the department, it'll be as if they started on day one.
So they would have two pensions?
That's a matter of what design we come up with. So this was supposed to be the first step to step back and assess how to approach it. There are several ways it can be approached. Right now, the employer contributions, as I had mentioned earlier, stay with each pension plan. We have not, the reciprocity program does not permit employer contributions to move. That could be something that could be looked at.
Yeah. Why don't you look at it first and then implement it? Why suspend something without knowing what you're going to create?
Well, the objective of the suspension was that this was an area of concern.
It was what?
This was an area of grave concern. We looked at all of the numbers going back. We had the Siegel Company conduct an actuarial study. They looked at the past 6 years. 1,600 employees transferred into DWP. Several of them retired during this time that the department funded. Some of them came in with a few years of service. They are still working there. Some of them came in with great number of years of service. And regardless, for each member, there is an unfunded liability that accrues. So the objective of the suspension was to step back and take a look and see how to address this, the design of the program. And there are several approaches that can be used, but this was intended to be just the first
So
one.
now you've suspended reciprocity. So what happens to an employee that goes tomorrow?
Well, we have not yet suspended it.
Oh, you haven't suspended?
No, the suspension, the method of suspension is provided in the city charter, and what is required is a 3-step process. The retirement board, which has the fiduciary responsibility and the plenary authority over the pension plan assets of the Water and Power pension plan, basically has been reviewing this arrangement, the reciprocal arrangement, for almost 2 years now. We've been looking at the costs associated with different components of the pension plan. And after having continuously reviewed this for some time, from some of the remarks made, it appears that it was done very quickly, but this has taken a long time to even come to this point where there was a decision made to start the process.
But in 6 years, why not have an alternative plan to present?
Well,
if they spent 6 years doing this, they couldn't come up with an alternative? Instead of just suspending it?
No, the 6 years is the data that was studied. That's
Okay.
The Siegel Company studied the data for the past 6 years, and
Oh, so how long has that study been going on?
we just got the report, and it's in your package.
So how long did it take them to do the study?
It took them a month or so.
Oh, just a month?
4 weeks or so. We gave them the data. It took
And you didn't ask them for any solutions or
Well,
alternatives
material-
to this? You can't just stop the thing. And so what alternatives are coming? I mean, it's pretty hard to evaluate this without knowing what the alternative is. Why not propose alternatives before you suspend the thing?
Well, the retirement board does have ideas on alternatives. We have to get into the process of, working with lacers. But the first step was to suspend the program, to stop incurring additional liability while this is being developed. And,
okay.
certainly, depending on what's agreed to, steps can be taken to implement the new design. That's the approach that was being looked at.
Well, it was like DWP cherry picks the city employees, and now that with the incentives, including a higher pension return, moving people over left and right, but when we have a shortage of jobs and need a helping hand from DWP to prevent layoffs, now you want to push back. So you want your cake and eat it too. How do we know that this 6-year period defines the long term? What is the experience over the last 20 years, and what do we anticipate the experience going to be in 20 years? Are some of these employees going to move back to the city system? And are you going to demand reciprocity from the city? I assume you will, because it's, in your view, it's your fiduciary responsibility.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to do a plan design that's fair for both sides. That's all we're trying to do. Our goal as trustees is not the layoffs of the city, it's the integrity of the pension plan.
Yeah.
That's all we're doing. Our only focus is integrity of the plan. And if the pipe's leaking water, we got to stop the leak. And that's all we're doing until we can get a permanent solution. That's just...
Except we're not dealing with pipes and water, we're dealing with human beings. And there are many decisions that individuals that work for the city now will not be able to make because this program is in suspension in terms of taking advantage of job opportunities that might be at DWP that they won't take advantage of. They'll just stay where they are because they don't know what the program's going to be. I don't know how that helps DWP unless you think you're going to hire outside. I also think we ought to take a look at the cap rate. Maybe we're not charging enough, and maybe our examination process is a little more expensive than we really think. And maybe we ought to take a look at. I can't imagine that $30 million can't be recouped someplace else. But for all the other things that the city does to cover for DWP, maybe we need to adjust that and find a way to get another $30 million because that's our fiduciary responsibility. Or maybe we should sit down before we take any severe action and come to agreement as opposed to just throwing rocks in a glass house. You're taking a dangerous step here. And you may think it's your fiduciary responsibility, but in your fiduciary responsibility, you have to consider the short and long-term ramifications. If you take this action, you can bet that this city council is not going to sit back and let DWP slide. We're going to find a way to get that money back.
Thank you, Mr. Alarcon. The suspension has no ending. The suspension could be indefinite, correct? You don't have an ending date for the suspension. It could be a year, 2 years. It could be indefinite. There's no end on the suspension.
Is it indefinite?
I'm sorry?
The way the plan amendment is currently constructed, you're right. There's no end on that.
So we could go into a suspension and last 5, 6?
Yeah, it could, theoretically.
There's no termination on it. I have, like I said, 18 questions, and I think that from the sense I'm receiving from my colleagues, I don't know if I need to go into all these questions, but I'm going to, we'll put on the record, Ms. Perry has some comments that we want on the record and some direction that I think we would agree on.
Okay. I'm sufficiently concerned that I'm inclined to vote no and then send this back for more work because I don't think I can I could not vote affirmatively today. I do have one quick question. Would a 245, this is for the city attorney, I guess, Does a 245 affect the suspension in any way?
Well, the suspension is part of the board's action, as I understand it. So if you veto under 245, then you're sending that whole decision back to the originating board.
Okay.
So in essence, yes,
And that's all we can do with a 245?
that's correct.
Okay, well, I just wanted to put some things on the record so that I try to begin putting a rationale on the record as to why I wanted to vote. I do intend to vote no today, and then I guess Mr. Zine can do his input and we'll take public comment. I am concerned that I understand your term, you kept the CLA and the CAO informed. I understand that you feel, and perhaps by your bylaws, are actually legally restrained from allowing them to participate in the decision-making process, but certainly there could be some ability to include their opinion on a record or as part of your record so they could give you a response and some of their own analysis if we're actually all trying to work for overall pension reform. This would be an excellent opportunity and a way to, a test case or a proving ground to be able to do that. I think I need more clarification, and I don't expect you to give that to me today, but I'd like it in our CAO and CLA analysis as to what suspension means and how long it could potentially last. I understand that there are differences in governance structure, and I recognize that. But I also would like to know, again, from our CLA and CAO, whether or not those differences in governance structures can be reconciled as part of an overall pension reform, and what, if that's possible, what are the legal issues, what are the legislative options that need to be taken to achieve that goal. And then, I don't know if I'm correct in terms of a legal interpretation, because I'm not a lawyer, I don't know, but from a common sense perspective, a suspension feels like, or is tantamount to, eliminating reciprocity, particularly if there's no time frame on it and it can go on indefinitely, and especially if the board of the Department of Water and Power never adopts anything different or anything definitive. And in reviewing the Department of Water and Power board resolution, I'm obviously extracting a piece, so, bear with me on this, but this is a quote: "All employees who transfer from the city to the Department of Water and Power and whose hire date, H-I-R-E, hire date, precedes the effective date of this amendment shall be covered by," there's some ellipses, "reciprocity provision as it existed immediately prior to the effective date of this plan amendment." That's end quote. So for me, and then we need more clarification on this, legal clarification, I guess, and the CLA and CAO need to have a participatory role in preparing that response. The key, in my opinion, is the hire date. Hired by whom? The city or the Department of Water and Power. Then it would not apply to people who are in the city now. And if you mean, or if those words mean by the Department of Water and Power, then it would apply to any city person who transfers to the Department of Water and Power after the adoption. So I need clarification on those issues in order for me to vote in an affirmative manner. So I just want to put on the record now, because of the reasons that I've just stated, my intention today is to vote no and send it back for more work.
Mr. Alacon?
I have to leave at 3 o'clock. I apologize for going out of turn, but it would also be my intent to introduce a motion to have the CAO reassess the cap rate at Department of Water and Power to ensure that they are paying a sufficient amount to reimburse the city for costs that we incur as a result of our administration of programs that, for example, the examination process and many other processes that the city participates in. I believe we may be underfunded in that regard, and I would like to introduce a motion to that, but I think it's appropriate to introduce that separate and apart from this action. I'm opposed to this because, first of all, I don't think there's been a sufficient consideration and effort to negotiate and to have an alternative, but to just drop a suspension idea that if imposed would essentially stymie any transfers of employees to DWP because people would fear losing their pension benefits. And that could cause severe impact, particularly next year when we're potentially faced with more cutbacks. And so I think my fiduciary responsibility is to the city as a whole, including DWP, not just to one part of the city, but the entire city. And I like to think that we're all in the same boat, and we're all fiduciarily responsible for each other. I think this is penny wise and pound foolish, and I think that you should reconsider your action because I think the ramifications could be devastating.
Mr. Alcon, if you can just wait till I'll read these and we'll be finished with this by 3. Mr. Parks?
To clarify, did the controller just do the CAP study in the last couple of months? Is that the one that we're currently using? I thought they just did a brand.
I believe they did it. Yeah, I did just recently do an update.
That's no more than a couple of months old.
You might have missed a few things.
Yeah, I'm just saying that. But one thing I was going to ask Ms. Perry, with the number of things that you've asked for, do we have the opportunity to, rather than vote today, to get any of that information back in this committee before the 21-day expiration?
The last day on this is October 13th, correct?
I don't know.
The last day is October 13th.
Then scratch that.
So there's not sufficient time. Let me go into these, and then Mr. Alcon will be done before 3 for your other appointment. Explain the current reciprocal agreement between Water and Power and Lacers. How does the current reciprocal agreement work between the two systems? What was the intent of the current reciprocal agreement? How is the current reciprocal agreement different from other agreements with other retirement systems, if any? Why has Water and Power decided to suspend the current reciprocal agreement at this time? If such a problem exists, why not bring attention to this matter sooner? And I refer to a motion that I did. We'll give you a copy of all this for the follow-up. A motion that was introduced June 4th and requested the Water and Power, the board consider a report by the retirement plan manager, the history and procedures to amend the program. So this was already brought up, but we still don't have an answer to it. Resolution indicates to suspend the current reciprocal agreement. What is Water and Power's plan to address reciprocity if the resolution is approved? There is a lot of national press about the benefit levels and funding status of government pensions. What is Water and Power doing in regards to pension reform measures, if any? Actual calculated liability going back 6 years. How was it determined to go back 6 years? How was cost neutrality defined? Is 6 years an adequate time period to analyze and determine whether cost neutrality is achieved? Does Lacers experience an actual loss when an employee transfers from DWP to Lacers? Did the actual study employee transfers from Lacers to DWP? And if not, why not? Did Water and Power formally request to meet with Lacers to discuss suspension, the current reciprocal agreement? And if, why not? What is the factual impact to the city's general fund? Water and Power staff report indicates a $470 million estimated cost of transfers. Actual report indicates the impact of $183 million. There is a discrepancy we need explained. What is the impact of employees transferring from city to Water and Power and vice versa? Did Water and Power notify and meet with any labor unions regarding the suspensions? The resolution indicates that in addition to suspending the reciprocal agreement, new DWP retirement plan members will not be eligible to purchase city time. Why is that necessary? Are there any legal concerns regarding this action? We have 2 speakers, and Arthur Hanson. Mr. Hanson. And Robert.
Thank you.
My name is Arthur Hansen. I have 34 years with the city, about 10 of it from water and power. I've been back and forth about 4 or 5 times. I would never come over back in 1985 from water and power, except on the issue of I would, be able to go back. And the issue comes up to promissory estoppel, which means, we were induced to do something by a promise. The promise being I could go back to water and power, and now water and power says we're not going to do it. The boards, the various committee members here expressed a number of concerns that I would have raised, but that's the main thing issue on promissory estoppel, and it's a slam dunk situation that would happen if somebody took it to court, because it's right in black and white. And also the city charter specifies that in the new city charter that positions are supposed to be filled by transfer whenever practical. That's another issue that water and power doesn't seem to want to address either. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Dorman?
Mr. Chairman and Madam Chair, my name is Robert Dorman. I'm an attorney. I represent the three elected members of the Department of Water and Power Retirement Plan. Javier Romero, who's sitting next to me, Cindy Kaufman, who's sitting in the audience, and Barry Poole, who could not be here today. What I'd like to do in the very short time that Councilman Alarcon has available is try to dispel some of the misapprehensions that agree here. First and foremost, this has never been a reciprocity program. Never was reciprocal. In 1979, January the 11th, 1979.
Why suspended?
I beg your pardon?
Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Alarcon.
I'll listen as I'm walking out. Go ahead.
All right. In 1979, Dr. C. Irwin Piper, who had tried for 3 years since 1977 when the charter amendment was made to provide a reciprocal program, he wrote the following: any further efforts to institute a reciprocal retirement benefits arrangement between WPERP and CERS is fruitless. He described what we were coming up with as a portability plan. And what that means is, and Chairman Zine, your example was excellent on this point. 25 years of service with one program and then 5 years more with the other, and the other gets stuck with all 30 years without ever having a dime of the 25 years of contributions. That's the problem. And it's come to light through the actuarial report, which is in your materials, which shows that there is a building liability, which is at least $183 million, which has interest mounting on it every day. And these people who are fiduciaries have an obligation to do something about it. Now, you want to talk about reforming pensions and reforming the department and all that, fine. But these people have an obligation to get doing something right now. And I would point out to you that they are the ones that have the sole authority to do this. I doubt that the council can remand or turn back what the retirement board has done. The reason is twofold.
Go ahead, finish your
Under the Constitution, Article 16, Section 17, the plenary authority to run these programs is in the retirement boards themselves. There's case law that says nobody, no legislative body can overturn that kind of decision. Secondly, there have been several opportunities for these people to try and get a program going that would solve this problem. The main theory that we seem to be ignoring is that we could do exactly what CalPERS does now. When it admits a new entity into its plan, it does not take any contributions coming from the prior plan. That plan's benefits are set, the contributions are there, CalPERS picks up the rest. In this case, you would have, in the effect of the suspension, you would have the LACERS keeping its contributions and the employee contributions and eventually awarding a pension benefit to the employee for those years of service, those 25 years of service. DWP would be giving a 5-year, I think 5-year vesting is here.
Okay. Well, before that, let me ask a question. It says here that you represent retirement board members. It also says you're with Local 18?
Yes. I represent Local 18.
Independent? Are you outside counsel to Local 18?
Yes, I am. Have been for 40 years.
Okay. All right.
Let me just ask one thing.
Wait, hold on, Ms. Perry.
Two things. Pursuant to 245, we have the right to either affirm or deny, so we actually do have a legislative right to put our questions on the record. We cannot change the action that has taken place, but by our actions today, if we vote no, it is sent back, and the board can either decide to ignore us or to hear what we have to say. So we actually do have that right. And by your use of the term, you said there's no reciprocity, there was a portability plan,
Right.
which then further adds to, I think, the confusion, which is why it makes me want to send it back even more. I'm going to ask the chief legislative analyst to take all the points I made today on the record, and including this issue of, is this, I need a clarification, is this a reciprocity or is this a portability plan, so we can have this on the record in a more formal way, which in a circular way goes back to why it might behoove you, while the CLA and the CAO may not have the right to be a part of your decision-making process, I think it would benefit you greatly to include them in your analysis portion of how you develop a process, so that we don't get into these sort of circular legislative machinations where we do send it back, because that makes me even less comfortable now that I've heard from you, and I'm also wondering how you represent the board members and local 18, but that's your issue
Okay,
to resolve.
Ms. Perry, I know Mr. Alarcon's ready. I want to get that vote before he leaves. I just want to say one thing, is that throughout this entire document, it says reciprocity. It says nothing other than reciprocity. So, Mr. Parks, and then we can get the vote.
Yeah, I don't quite understand. Who do you represent and who's paying you?
I'm representing the three board members who are elected by the membership. I'm representing them at the expense of IBEW Local 18 under Rule 3-350 of the Rules of Professional Conduct of the State Bar of California.
So you're representing them in their capacity of employees?
No,
In their
as
capacity-
board members. No,
As
sir,
board members?
As board members.
Okay.
As retiree board
And
members.
I need to ask the city attorney, as part of the report back, to give us an understanding of representation, because it would be, in my opinion, if they're acting in their fiduciary responsibility as a board member, it's beyond their employee status, which would appear, if they need representation, a city attorney would be sitting there. That's, would be my limited understanding of the law. But if you're here, unless they have some issue that requires an attorney as an individual or as an employee of DWP, I think that's different than their capacity as a board member.
Let there be no mistake about it, Councilman Parks. I'm representing them in their fiduciary capacity as
Well,
members.
let me say, there's no
of the
mistake
board.
about it. Let me make sure there's no mistake from my point. I want the city attorney to give us some guidance as to your role and the city attorney's role as it relates to their capacity as a board member.
Appointed by the mayor, confirmed by the council. Okay, Ms. Perry, you have a motion?
Vote.
Okay, there's a motion by Ms. Perry to vote no. Mr. Parks?
No.
Mr. Alarcon? Okay, that's unanimous, it's no. It's been vetoed, correct. All right, thank you. Next, that completes the joint meeting. Thank you, Ms. Perry.
Can I just say
Thank you,
one
Mr.
thing?
Alarcon. Mr. Parks, go ahead.
Let me just ask the CLA, could we have as much of the information that's been asked for by the time this gets to council, whatever can shine the light on some of this?
Thank you. Okay, let's continue with the personnel meeting. Councilmember Zion, Councilmember Parks, and we have 2, 3, and 4 item. So, Madam Clerk, if we can go ahead with number 2 before we evacuate the building. Thank you very much. All right, number 2, please.
Okay, and item 2, the city administrative officer has submitted a report. This is relative to resolution authorities approved by the city council and the mayor as part of the 2010-11 budget, and this item has also been referred to Budget and Finance Committee.
Ray.
Good afternoon. To sort of just give you a little bit of history, back when the budget was put together, there were a number of questions that came out of the Budget and Finance Committee report requesting some information and report back on the number of resolution position authorities that the city has that approved both on budget and off budget. If you may recall, just a few weeks ago, your committee and ultimately council approved what we call the PAR, the Personnel Authority Resolution, which contained the same listing of positions. Council did go ahead and approve those, but as I mentioned earlier, what we have here is a report back on some additional information that the Budget and Finance Committee requested. Just to quickly go through some of the information that the committee wanted. They wanted to know the year in which the particular resolution authority was authorized. Wanted to make sure they had information on the source of funds, whether the position is entirely reimbursed, the source of that funding, etc. This information is to sort of be used to perhaps have further discussions on where we need to go with our budget, both this year and next year. Just a couple of things that I would just want to draw to your attention. If you go to the attachment 1, which is the summary, you look at the total on-budget resolution authorities, it's 1,334, which most of those are filled. However, there are a little over 100 positions that are not entirely funded or partially funded, and I know there will be questions regarding those funding for those positions, and we certainly will be happy to address those. There are also almost 900 off-budget resolution positions, of which only one is a general fund position. All of the other positions are either funded through our proposition programs, meaning our Prop F, Q, etc., or through other off-budget sources of funds. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Look forward to the further discussion that we'll have on these.
Yeah, this is for information purposes only. When I'm looking at the graph, we've got, as you said, 1,334 total. And the question is, where you have 75 not funded. So what are we doing with those 75 people?
That is correct. Through various actions that were taken in the budget, positions were either restored or granted in departments without funding. It was the intent at that time that the departments would absorb those costs through other means to basically they were to fill those. Did they? Absorb. Many cases, yes. If you look at the police department, the 18, most of that has to do with, I think, teams and some other positions that they have. Sanitation, there are some wastewater positions, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, if they're not funded, though, how are we paying them?
The department was to identify other sources of funds.
Well, have they? There's 75 people who are employed, and it says they're not funded. So if they're not getting a paycheck, which is payday today, I assume they did get a paycheck. How are we paying for them if they don't have funds for them?
It's actually a mixed bag with billing safe at this point. Those are basically they've identified savings for those. As we look at move on down for sanitation, those there's been monies identified. The same with rec and parks. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be coming forward with our first financial status report, which will highlight some of the issues and trouble areas with our departments. Most of these, as I scan down those that are not funded, I think they're okay, except for some of our favorites, PD.
Well, we have a problem if they're not funded, and I'm sure Mr. Parks has concerns about having positions where there's not funding and the deficit keeps growing. Mr. Parks?
Hi, Ray.
Good afternoon.
Now, we've talked about this at Budget and Finance, but one of the concerns that alerted us this year was that as we went through and cut 4,000 positions or whatever the number was, for whatever reason, the resolution authorities were given more weight in many instances than the budgeted position because they were basically off discussion. And one of the things I think we need, and hopefully when we get it to Budget and Finance, that we really need some clarity as to the policy of what creates a sub-authority. And in that policy, we need to make sure there's a termination period. And now, one of the things in this ever-moving personnel function, I always thought a sub-authority was a position that you gave and you paid for it within your existing resources, but that a reso authority was something that was temporary that you actually, there was funds for, whether it was special funds or grant funds, but it was more temporary. It was temporary, but that there was a source. And subs were, there is no source, we'll give them to you, and if you save the money, you can fund it. But then on these 75 that are unfunded, it seemed like we've kind of bled into sub-authority definition of, if I'm correct.
Well, the sub-authority is not contained here, and it's sort of a different
No,
authority.
but I'm saying that I'm looking at that not funded. My impression was not funded was generally attributed to a sub-authority, that you basically got an authority. If you can't find the money in your budget, it doesn't get filled. But I always thought that res authorities, there was some source.
That's right, there's usually some source. For, let's take building and safety, the 22. The theory behind granting those authorities with no funding was to give that department some management flexibility in dealing with the workload. And we've had discussion as far as the construction activity and so forth.
But I think the problem with that is the issue is often they hire a full-time 30-year employee to deal with a short-term blip in the workload. And what we've said is that if you're going to deal with that short-term workload spike, you should be using as needed and employees with a short timeline. But if you go out and they ask for, what, 82 in the budget? If you go out and hire 22 because you're in a spike and then it goes backwards, they don't lay them off. They just kind of struggle and keep paying them even though the workload doesn't account for it. So that's what I'm concerned about on the, first of all, that 75. That we, if I understand resolution authorities, we shouldn't have resolution authorities that are unfunded. If they're sub-authorities, then it's got a way I understand it, a little clearer picture. If you don't have the money, you can't deal with it. But again, I think we need a more clear picture of what a resolution authority is, and it would appear that all of them should come with a ending date. Also, it would appear that we kind of, because there's so many of them, we deal with them in a blanket fashion, as opposed to how we deal with exempt positions one at a time. We deal with all these, said, okay, let's approve 1,300. That dollar figure, I think, is close to $70 million for those 1,300 positions. That's a lot of money that's off the record. And so, I mean, that's what I think we have to clean up and you know, and stick some dollar figures on what the 1,300 amounts to. What is that true dollar figure? We really need to pare through the 75 and determine, should we ever have a resolution authority that doesn't have funding? And so that, you know, I can, you know, that's one. The other one is, as we go through these issues, grants are another issue that we have to look at more seriously, because we know we get upside down on grants. Often we expend twice the money to get half the grant, and whether that's a good investment for us. So those grant ones are another priority. Probably the only ones that have some security in mind are those that are special funded, particularly if people aren't overdoing their special funds, and those that are on general fund, which then you know you've approved them, and there's a dollar value to them. But the other ones, I think we're going to have to, and I don't want to go through the 200-page report that was attached to the one-page report.
We know you love the details.
I know,
Toby.
but the thing is that June convinced me today not to tear down a tree and put it in the Xerox machine. But we do need to have more clarity when it comes to budget as to the dollar part of it, and what should be the review process. What are we going to do with these 75 that are unfunded? How are we going to address at some point dropping some of that 70 million off the budget? And what is the review process each year that says, you know, when we look at them collectively at 1,300, It's a lot of positions, but should we break them up and look at all the grant funded as a body and determine, do any of those grants deal or worthy of it? Or are we still chugging along with something that we got a grant for, it disappeared, and these positions are still floating out there, as one of our favorite departments has done for years? They just keep getting grants, and they're upside down from the minute they get it. But again, and then making sure people aren't overspending their special funds. But that's the kind of discussion I'd like to have at budget, because a $70 million off-budget allocation is a lot of money that we just kind of approve. I mean, I don't even think we give this as much scrutiny as, you know, like somebody said recently, it's like in the 2,000 pages, and who reads them?
Well, I think the one thing on the resolution of the positions, and I know one of your concerns has been that we have carried some of these for years, and like you said, in some of those grant
I
programs.
think some of them have been well over 10 years.
The PACER ones, things of that sort. The beauty from a budget perspective, as far as, you know, from CAO and I'm sure CLA as well, is it forces a annual review of those positions, and so they don't go into sort of department's base. A lot of departments like, you know, those numbers going into the base, so then they hope things get sort of glossed over during budget review.
But I think the issue is where is the review? See, now, did they put you in a dark room and twist your arm? Or are they reviewed at the committee level? You know, what is the scrutiny that goes on? And the key is that if we've cut 4,000 and we have 1,300 positions offline, and we've not done anything to them, and yet positions that we have clearly over years sweated over and got them in the budget, and we whack them without even blinking. But these reso authorities are just riding by themselves.
Yeah, and just, you know, to be clear, it's the 1,300 we vetted through a committee last year. All of those were in the blue book and so forth, so.
But never the scrutiny that, because I don't think we would, if you asked any member of the Budget and Finance Committee, I don't think any of us have a clue that 1,300 offline positions exist, and you can't figure it out when you spread it through 800 pages. You know, even I would sit there and mark them 1, 2, 3. All right. So the issue is we got to look at it more collectively.
And the other question is partial funding. Is it 25% funded, 50% funded, 75% funded? How much funding do you have? So if you have the 42 and the 75, and if 75 accounts to 70 million, how much are we spending on the 42, and what percentage do we have funded? Sure. Is it 30% funded and 70% no funding?
Mm-hmm. And we'll go through that. Each of those have a separate, I don't want to say story, but separate funding allocation behind those. Animal services, there's money returned, but not to the full extent, you know, finance and et cetera, so.
And I think probably what we're going to do in the regular budget is when we go through the page by page, you just can't get the significance, but we're going to probably have to do it like we do Schedule H, and collectively look at them and see what sense they make, because 70 million is a lot of money for, and particularly with positions that were supposed to be short-term, and they've outlived the people that asked for them.
That is true. I think if you were to look at a graph and look at our resolution positions, they certainly over the past 10 years have substantially grown. So.
Yeah, I think it's an easy way
we need to shrink them then.
Yeah, but it's an easy way to budget. You know, I mean, you don't have to go through the regular process. It's only for a year. Okay, can I have it another year? And it just goes. It grows like topsy.
Oh, so this is a information purpose only. We'd like to get answers, Ray, to the those two, partial and not funded.
Yeah, we'll try to hash that out in budget finance on the committee report when it gets to council.
All right, so note file for that particular matter. Number 3, please.
On item 3, the Community Development Department is requesting a civil service exemption for a senior project coordinator position. This is for the Green Sector Initiative, and this is in accordance with Charter Section 1001D4, and the Civil Service Commission has recommended approval.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Navarro, and I'm the Acting Personnel Director for the Community Development Department. And I'm here seeking approval of the exemption for the senior project coordinator position. It is a grant-funded position. This is a position that will manage the city's Green Sector Initiative program, which is, once again, grant-funded through the City Workforce Investment Act and the ERA allocation.
How long is the grant funded for?
There are actually numerous sources that are funding. My understanding is that they have different end dates. So they're various. My understanding is that there is continued effort to obtain additional funding in addition to what they have now approved. So I'm not able to give you an exact response to
I don't want to end
that.
up with the similar situation where the grant runs out and there's no funding and the person remains. That's one of the problems. While it's fully funded at $88,197, that I assume with benefits? That includes the benefits?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
Or
Yeah,
are the
no.
benefits?
And we could come back and provide you with the dates of the different funds.
I want to make sure that the funding continues, and when the funding ceases, the position should cease if we don't have additional funding. As Mr. Parks knows, the budget's getting tighter every year. We can't keep positions if there's no funds for them. Mr. Parks?
I was just wondering, was this position created because of EAD being dissolved? Is that why, did we know that?
I'm sorry, if the AAD,
The Environmental Affairs Department. Is that why this position?
this is actually the green sector, well, that's in part, yes.
I mean-
It's the green sector jobs.
Okay, so that they're basically assuming the EAD responsibility
Yes.
and creating this position to do it?
That's correct.
Okay, but now, didn't positions come with those duties?
Well, that is actually, these are, I believe you're referring to the EECBG positions. There were 4 positions that came with that, but that's different. That's
Okay,
something
so
separate.
we're creating a new position to
That's-
oversee the 4 employees that were sent there?
No, this particular position will manage the city's Green Sector Initiative program within CDD. So it's different.
Green Sector Initiative Program.
Well, let me give it a try here. I'm not as familiar with the operational aspects of this position. I know the personnel information, but I can tell you that this program is actually a collaboration of the city's Workforce Investment Board, the Community Development Department, as well as the Los Angeles Community College District and the LA Workforce Systems Collaborative. My understanding is that this partnership represents all of the major employment and training programs in the region.
But is this stimulus money?
Yes,
Okay.
that would be the ARA portion.
That came through the WIB board?
That's correct.
Okay, but now, are the, I just want to go back, are the tasks, the jobs we given to CDD from EAD's demise, or is it you're asking for this position to support a grant that ARA has given you?
This is to support a grant that within ARA, the ARA allocation and the WIB as well.
So it's ARA grant funded position to do the business of the grant?
That's correct.
It says here, percent of time spent supervising, training, evaluating employees, signing and reviewing work, 10%.
That's on the position description you're looking at?
It says they're going to indicate the number of employees supervised by class title, 1 management assistant, 1 community support administrative worker. So they're going to supervise 2 people?
Yeah, it's actually probably more like 1.5. The community support administrative worker normally is a part-time employee.
Yeah, but they only supervise a couple of people, but their span of influence is greater because they're working with the WIB board and bringing all these activities together.
That's correct. So the supervision is actually widespread.
Is this an open competitive test?
No, this is an exempt position.
Oh, civil service exemption?
Mm-hmm. And it's an exempt position due to the temporary nature of the grant funding.
Well, how long is the grant funding?
Well, that goes back to your first question.
Exactly. So what number will this bring us to on exemptions? How many will this be?
This is one, this is the first one.
No, we have a...
We have two
We
for
have a
2 years.
limited number of exempt positions in the city.
Correct, yes, we do, sir. This is exempted under the grant-funded clause, which there isn't a cap on that one. You're thinking of the 1001B, which is the professional scientific, that's 150. We're at 95 right now.
95? So the numbers are down. So what happens when the grant runs out on this? If this is exempt under the grant, what happens when the grant?
That'd be a funding issue for the department to resolve in regards to either obtaining additional grant monies or moving the person or terminating their employment.
My question is, if we got all these other issues that we discussed in the previous matter, where we have over 100 folks, 75 not funded at all, and 42 partial funding, do they slip into that category? That's the problem. We need to either have funding or not have funding, and not leave it, maybe we get it, maybe we don't get it. I don't have a problem with the position, I'm just concerned that we have the continuing funding. If not, then there's got to be some alternative measures.
But I think on this, if the grant funds runs out, the exempt position goes away.
That's correct. It works with the department's budget in regards to how they end up paying for that position.
But we still have departments that have positions that are not paying. There's no funding for them. That's what I'm saying. If the grant runs out, they keep the position there, and there's no funding for it.
Yes, sir. There's no mechanism that's directly related to the funding with the exemption as far as for terminating an employee.
Well, there should be, Mr. Parks. If we have a grant funded,
Yeah, I think the grant, we'd hope that the grant, if it expires, and the reason you're asking for exempt is they go away when the funding goes away, and that we're not absorbing positions with no money.
Correct. I
Our
believe that's
program is
I
gone.
believe that's the department's intent, yes.
Okay, and if you later change your mind, you're going to come through the budget process.
Add them as a regular authority, yes.
let's
That's the
make,
way I understood it.
let's make that as part of this approval, as long as the grant funding is there. Once the grant funding is gone, then that person is eliminated, that position is eliminated, unless they have additional funding. So we don't keep floating positions without funding.
Yeah, that's good.
So we will put that condition on to this particular request. So we'll approve the exemption with the condition regarding the funding. Okay?
Thank you.
Parks?
Yes.
All right. Next item, please.
On item 4, the city administrative officer is requesting an exemption for finance specialist 5 position within their office. And there is a deadline for council to act on this by October 22nd.
Good afternoon again.
Mr. Ray.
We have before you a Finance Specialist 5 exemption request for the CAO's office. This is actually one of our critical positions, one of many in our office, and certainly the lead in the budget process as we sort of look at sort of our finances and where we're going to go this year and in the out years. This certainly is a critical position as far as providing some direction, guidance, oversight, et cetera, in both the preparation of the budget and also administration of the budget. And as we've looked at folks that would sort of qualify and slip into that role, the CAO has reached out to an individual who thought would be appropriate and have the experience, the budget experience, and experience with other leaders across the city who would be able to slip into this role and assume this role pretty much with their hit the ground running, so to speak. As you know, we lost one of our employees to the controller's office. Certainly was a loss for us, their gain, but the individual who will serve in this position, we believe, has the right set of qualification and experience to help us out.
Well, I'm glad you think so. I wonder what Ms. Gibson says. She's
Is
in
this
the
a new
audience,
position?
smiling.
No, this is an existing position that we have in our office.
So you're just renewing it?
The prior, it was basically a chief admin analyst, and it's been a civil service position for years.
What, are you just putting all the budget people under one?
No, the group, the individual is going to manage the same group. It's just that we, instead of having a civil service, employee, we're going to have an exempt employee that's going to slip into the role.
You can dismiss him at will. Or dismiss her at will.
So it's the same.
It's the
configuration, same money?
Exactly, same money. We have funds budgeted for it. We're good to go. Full funding, both direct and indirect.
That means they can't be unionized.
Means they have to answer to a higher master. Now, there is a notation here to instruct the CAO to conduct a selection process for the finance specialist and allow qualified city employees to apply. How come we didn't do that? Ms. Gibson has some qualifications.
I think Ms. Gibson is certainly, hopefully she's satisfied with where she's at, and
I question that some days.
Yes, you may too.
Particularly after every personnel committee.
We actually internally spoke with a number of individuals and asked for some feedback, some interest from individuals to see whether those folks would want to slip in the role. Unfortunately, we didn't get any takers.
But it's a unique position and a very specialized function.
That is correct. I mean, it is a key position in our office to direct many of the budget activities.
How key is it to your position?
Well, as I guess I could say, I'm sort of Miguel's right-hand person. This individual would be my right-hand person.
How come we never have a left hand? I went to a luncheon for Captain Sherman, who's getting promoted, and I sat next to, believe it or not, Mr. Hand. He said, "You'll always remember my name." I said, Mr. Hand. Had nothing to do with this, but you talk about right hand. Okay, Mr. Parks?
No, I
So you make a motion?
We'll move it.
Thank you very much.
well. You have it, Ray. Thank you very much.
For the record, are you simply approving the request?
Pardon me?
Are you approving the request without any additional recommendations, or are you making
Well,
additional recommendations?
They've done the search, so they tried.
I'm going to take Ray's word.
Okay, so you're approving the request.
We'll move the request. They tried to do it, but it didn't work. That concludes our meeting at 3:35. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. No public comment.